Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And today I'm asking the question, can the US military access your Oura ring? So for the record, I don't own an Oura ring. I actually thought about getting one a while back, and I didn't know this was an actual controversy until I read an article by Sarah Sloat of Slate. So here we are, and here's the nutshell that we're going to be talking about. And for the record, I'm going to give my standard preamble here. Cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're not immune from it. And given that I am in cybersecurity and I am also an expert in infrastructure security, I've got a lot of thoughts on this one. So again, if you own an Oura ring, you're going to want to listen to how this is broken down. But here's the primer. If you didn't know, on August 27th, Oura, which is, for the record, out of Finland, which I didn't know, they announced that they were opening up a manufacturing facility in the state of Texas to, quote, better meet the needs of the DoD, end quote, or Department of Defense, the U.S. military. So the company also reiterated its position as the, quote, trusted wearable of choice, end quote, to the Department of Defense. A spokesperson talking to Slate also said that while the news about the manufacturing facility was new, the nature of the relationship between Oura and the DoD began in 2019, and it has not changed since then. They're just moving production facilities to essentially the United States. So 6 years later, if you've had an Oura ring, they've already been working with the DoD. But obviously, for many owners of Oura rings, the fact that the DoD is the largest enterprise customer that Oura has, that's not welcome for a lot of people. So the backlash intensified when users noticed a detail in essentially Oura's post. And for the record, I'm going to give my normal preamble here that cybersecurity is agnostic to politics, but we're not immune from it. So I do not care what you believe politically, but this is what Oura post said, that Palantir, who is the software company that was partly founded by Peter Thiel, was involved because of Palantir's software and data contract with the DoD. And if you've been following along with everything in Palantir and their AI and all of that, there are a lot of people out there that are concerned about Palantir, and I'm sure plenty of people cheering them on. So the conversation then quickly gained traction online, specifically in Reddit and TikTok, with some users saying that it was time to ditch the ring because of security, privacy, and ethical concerns, with Oura working with the Department of Defense, who is then working with Palantir. So Oura attributes this, though, as specifically this backlash to misinformation, because less than a week after that initial announcement, the CEO of Oura, Tom Hale, posted a video to the company's subreddit clarifying that early viral claims about Oura sharing data with Palantir were false. To meet government security requirements, the Oura Enterprise platform, which is separate from its consumer-facing platform, I'm going to talk about that, is required to use Palantir's FedStart hosting environment. And for the record, they are not required to use it unless that is part of their DoD contract. I'll talk about that in a second. So the DoD can only access data that has been shared by service members who have consented, meaning military service members, not regular consumers or commercial users like you or I would be. So while the growing mutualism between tech and government strengthens, it may also leave some consumers behind, particularly women concerned about surveillance, about the exploitation of reproductive health data. I've talked about that before here on my radio show, podcast, video, and all of that, and we'll dive into that slightly here as well. So these consumers the consumers' growing mistrust of technology is linked to their unwillingness to support companies that are profiting from an administration that is causing them unease. And so I'm thinking that this is very interesting as well if it was on the flip side when President Biden was president, because he was president for most of Oura having a contract with the DoD. You know, if the other side of the aisle felt the same way as those on the other side of the aisle, feel right now. So let's break this down, because the real question simply here is, and this is part of my expertise in cybersecurity, compliance, infrastructure, and all of that, is that can the DoD, the Department of Defense, or newly renamed Department of War, actually gain access to your Oura data if you're just a regular consumer? So first, we're going to dive in here, and we're going to take their CEO at face value here and say that the answer is no. And there are, for the record, good odds that this is true, but we're going to poke basically holes in this as well. So here's really, I think, what the crux of this is. What a lot of people don't know is that there is a commercial cloud, like Microsoft and Amazon, all of that will or any major cloud provider will provide. It is not the same as a government cloud offered here in the United States to federal departments, whether it's the DoD, the State Department, the Treasury Department, and all of that. In the US government, essentially, they run on a security controls framework known as NIST 853. NIST 853 is over 1,000 individual cybersecurity controls with an absolute metric ton of objectives to meet. Commercial clouds do not have the standard for adherence as well. So basically, if you are going to be a cloud commercial provider, let's say I'm going to spin up a cloud to compete with Amazon and Microsoft, and I want to have government contracts, I'm going to become what is called FedRAMP authorized. So FedRAMP is the program that essentially says that I, as a cloud provider, need to adhere to certain baselines, low, medium, or high. Now, most FedRAMP providers go to medium, which is basically 330 odd individual controls, tons of objectives and all of that. But this is separate and isolated from a commercial environment, because FedRAMP requires this kind of isolation. Only American citizens or U.S. persons, depending on the stringency of the cloud, can access this. So if I'm a Microsoft with a government cloud, basically I'm not letting Canadians or Germans or Brazilians or whoever access this. U.S. personnel is going to basically keep this access to this data and be within this ecosystem as well. This is wildly different than commercial cloud, where you can outsource a help desk to India that can gain access to this kind of cloud, and there's not really a problem or issue with this. A Microsoft or an Amazon will give you a lot of different security controls like multi-factor authentication, geolocation, all these kinds of things in commercial cloud, but it's not nearly as stringent. And by virtue of that, the FedRAMP cloud that the U.S. military would be using through Palantir essentially would have vastly more security controls around it, and therefore be vastly more expensive. Meaning, essentially, if Oura were to basically put their millions of users that have Oura Rings data in a FedRAMP cloud, they would be paying an enormous amount of money compared to just storing your data in the commercial cloud. And the commercial cloud would be physically separated or logically separated from the FedRAMP side, because it has less controls. It has access by foreign nationals here in the United States. Your data can be replicated outside of the US and backed up to Canada or wherever it is. And so by virtue of that, if we're looking at this, it would be in Oura's worst interest to put commercial or consumer data in a government cloud, because it's purely cost prohibitive, not to mention the fact that Oura has to jump through an absolute metric ton of hoops themselves to basically have policies, procedures, process maturity, these controls internal to their organization across the entire organization, as opposed to, let's say, a subset of Oura employees, and those are the ones dedicated to working on the federal side or government side here in the United States. It is Ferrari money, not Ford money, if you are going to FedRAMP. And so that is the basic logic of this. But let's poke some holes in this, because quite frankly, even though there is logical separation, and I do think, to the CEO Tom Hale's point, is that if I have an Oura Ring and I'm not a member of the federal government or the DoD in this case, yeah, my data is going into a commercial cloud because it's way cheaper for them to do that. Let's poke holes through this anyway, because it is possible that a couple of different things could happen that would allow, let's say, commercial data to be accessed by the DoD or other government agencies. So the first one simply is, if Oura is hosting both commercial and FedRAMP environments in Palantir itself. So if Palantir has a commercial environment and they're also using that, odds are they're using Amazon, which is going to be way cheaper than Palantir. But if they were using a commercial cloud in Palantir, well, then it's very possible that a Palantir employee would walk from the FedRAMP side, of the infrastructure and walk over to the commercial side and gain access to it in that way, or copy the data out on the back end. That's something that you or I would never see, but Palantir would know, or those employees that were tasked with that would know. The other thing is simply this: if Oura allows back-end access directly to the DoD or the U.S. government in some way without a warrant, meaning they've invited them in and said, yeah, here DoD or FBI or DOJ or whatever it is, here's their login to our commercial cloud. Now, the people that have these commercial rings could think, well, yeah, why wouldn't they do that? It would be in their best interest if the government is going to come down on them on a ton of bricks, simply invite them in, because our data is not going to be, worth much to Oura if Oura can't operate within the United States. And that is a very real conversation to have in this case. So that is a possibility as well. Also, if a warrant is in play, if a judge signs, some kind of administrative or criminal warrant against Oura, then they would have to cough up commercial data. We have very little privacy laws that indemnify citizens here in the United States. Unlike Europe, Finland falls under GDPR. We don't have anything like that here. Illinois has biometrics, which Oura would probably be part of, given what the Oura Ring does. There's also the CCPA in California. New York has SHIELD, but we don't have a nationwide law. So if you're sitting in a state that doesn't have that level of protection, like in Illinois, New York, California, et cetera, they could very well gain access to this without your information, again, on a warrant. Now, another thing would be if Oura simply backs up their commercial user data to a place where external parties like the DoD can get it. So think about TikTok, for example. TikTok kept saying and swearing up and down, we're using Oracle data centers in the United States. They absolutely were. They had a project out there called Project Texas that was supposed to be this isolation of US data versus Chinese data or any other user data. They completely blew that out of the water when we found out that TikTok was replicating all of the backups, meaning if you're an American and you're on TikTok, all of your data is getting replicated to Singapore. That's outside of US jurisdiction. God knows who has access to that. And thanks to whistleblowers, we knew the Chinese had access to that through Singapore. So they don't have to access, the US data centers of Oracle directly. They can simply just get it from the Singapore data centers that have a copy of all your data. So maybe they're getting it 20 minutes after you've posted your stupid video. I don't know. So is it possible that the US government has access to commercial data by default in Oura? Sure, it's very possible. But I think that the probability is lower purely due to the cost prohibitive nature of doing that. I have several clients that work with the federal government. I also have worked with the federal government in the past, present, et cetera, and FedRAMP environments, FedRAMP hosting, FedRAMP basically cloud storage is expensive. It's very expensive. You do not pay for that unless you need it. So for example, the one that we use for this cost me about 4 or 5 times what a standard business account would cost per license, meaning that is a cost that my business is going to absorb. And I'm not going to use the FedRAMP cloud environment because I don't need that, but I'm working with the government, so I do. So if I wasn't working with the government, there'd be no reason for me to pay for that level, of basically access and security controls through my cloud provider, and that's what we're talking about here. What would be more concerning to me, more than Oura simply giving, let's say, back-end access, which again is very possible, but I don't think they're storing commercial or consumer data directly in the DoD cloud, as I just mentioned, due to cost. What's more concerning to me, especially from the women's health standpoint, is subpoenas from state governments like the state of Texas. Basically, we've seen those issues with menstrual tracker apps, in the App Store that you can go download. And if you're a woman and you're tracking your menstrual cycle, all those different kinds of things, then that data could potentially be turned over, especially for those states that have now implementing harsh criminal penalties for things like abortion. So that would be of concern to me, in that vein, that a state would actually subpoena Oura, and Oura would have to cough up data of, let's say, women or a woman or the entire female population that's using Oura in their state. So I think those are the issues that we've got here. But if you're using an Oura ring and you're not a member of the government, you're not a member of the military, there's a very good probability, I would say, that your data is not being touched by the federal government. And again, purely because of money. Nobody uses FedRAMP if you don't have to, because it's Ferrari money, not Ford money. So there you go. That is your news of the day. Take that for what it's worth. There are going to be plenty of people out here that probably do not believe me in terms of this and say, well, the government has access to everything. And at the end of the day, yeah, the government can be an incredibly blunt instrument and basically gain access through sheer force of will through the courts or whatever it is. But by default, I don't think Oura is doing that, because why would you pay for the Ferrari when the Ford will do? And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, I'm going to say private, informed, and secure. Take care.